She was tied up and left to die at sea, but a fisherman pulled her back from the dead. The sea was restless that night, roaring like a wounded beast beneath a bruised sky. Waves smashed against the jagged cliffs of West Hollow Bay, where few dared to cast their nets after dark. But Jonas Hale had debts to chase and his sister's child to feed. He pulled his small fishing boat against the swell, muscles aching with every drag of the net. The storm had passed, but the wind still whispered secrets. As the net came up heavy and tangled, Jonas expected another cluster of seaweed or lost crab traps. Instead, it was cloth, rough, soaked, wrapped around something far too solid. Then it moved. Panes, a cough, barely audible. A single, broken gasp. Panes. Jonas dropped the net, heart thundering. He lunged forward and peeled the coarse canvas back with trembling hands. Beneath the folds was a woman, barefoot, wrists bound, lips blue from cold. Her eyes flickered open for the briefest second. "Please," she whispered, voice brittle as snapped twigs. Without hesitation, Jonas lifted her from the net, staggering slightly under her dead weight. She was cold, too cold, but not gone. Not yet. He laid her in the bottom of the boat, tore off his coat and wrapped it around her, then steered for shore with every ounce of strength left in his arms. The journey back was a blur of icy spray and frantic glances. She groaned once, then went still. Jonas didn't speak, he only rowed harder. By the time he reached the rickety dock near his cliffside cabin, the sky had begun to lighten in bands of silver and pale gold. His niece, Lena, just 11, was waiting with a lantern, her eyes wide. "Uncle, who is that?" "I don't know," Jonas answered, hoisting the woman into his arms. "But someone threw her to the sea, and the sea gave her back." They brought her inside the drafty cabin, laid her near the fire, and covered her with every blanket they owned. Jonas knelt beside her, brushing damp hair from her face. She didn't wake, but her breathing had steadied. Faint. Fragile, but real. Lena looked on, her small fingers gripping Jonas's sleeve. "Is she going to die?" Jonas shook his head, jaw tight. "Not tonight," he said. The cabin creaked under the weight of wind and salt, perched like a stubborn thought on the edge of the cliffs. Inside, the fire popped and hissed as Jonas added another log. The woman, still nameless, still silent, lay curled on the old cot near the hearth, her skin pale beneath the blankets. Lena knelt beside her, dipping a cloth into a chipped basin of warm water. She dabbed it gently along the woman's brow, eyes narrowed in focus. "She's warmer now," the girl said. "That's good, right?" Jonas nodded. He hadn't slept. Not really. He'd sat in the wooden chair all night, listening for her breath, for any sign of change. She had shivered, moaned once in her sleep, then fell still again, but alive. That mattered most. "How much?" He stirred the stew pot, letting the scent of smoked fish and sea herbs fill the room. It wasn't much, but it was what they had. He poured a ladleful into a tin cup and brought it to the cot. "Try," he murmured, lifting her head slightly and pressing the rim to her lips. Her eyes fluttered open, just for a moment, a flicker of gray, confusion, fear, but then she drank, barely a mouthful, before falling back against the pillow. "She doesn't even know who we are," Lena whispered. "She doesn't need to," Jonas replied. "She just needs to know we're not the ones who hurt her." Outside, gulls circled above the crashing tide, and the sky threatened another storm. Inside, Jonas checked her wrists, still bruised, bound too long, and gently cleaned the marks. There was silence in her even when she slept. Not the peace of rest, but the silence of someone who had run out of words. Lena pulled a quilt tighter over the woman's shoulders. "Can I give her a name, just for now?" Jonas looked up. "What kind of name?" Lena thought a moment. "She came from the sea, and she's quiet. What about Marin?" Jonas considered it, then nodded. Marin. And so, for the days that followed, she became Marin. Marin slept for most of the first 3 days, Her body locked in a slow war between warmth and memory. When she did stir, it was never fully, just faint murmurs, half-formed words, flinches beneath the blankets as if even dreams were too sharp to bear. Jonas stayed close. He took shifts between fishing and tending the fire, always checking her breath before he left, always returning with salt on his coat and worry in his chest. He said little, but in every bowl of broth, every tucked corner of quilt, every silent vigil by the hearth, he spoke the language of care. Lena, on the other hand, spoke plenty. She read to Maren from her old books, fairy tales with cracked spines and sea-stained pages. She told stories about the gull she named Clementine, who always stole their bread. She held Maren's hand when it twitched in sleep and whispered, "You're safe now, we've got you." On the fourth morning, the wind softened. The sky opened just enough for a sliver of gold to fall across the cabin floor, and Maren opened her eyes. They were gray, clear, glassy, rimmed with fear. She blinked, then turned her head, taking in the room. The fireplace, the old net hung above the shelf, Lena asleep in a heap of blankets near the cot. Then her gaze met Jonas. "You're all right," he said quietly. "You're safe." She stared at him for a long moment, lips parted. Then, hoarsely, "Where?" "West Hollow Bay," he replied. "You were caught in my net, tied up, left for dead." Her brows knit. "I don't remember." "That's okay," Jonas said. "You don't have to, not yet." She looked down at her hands, still trembling. Her mouth moved as if trying to recall the shape of a name, but no sound came. Jonas leaned forward. "Do you know who you are?" Her throat worked. I don't." "Then Maren will do for now," he said. "Lena named you." She looked over at the girl, still curled by the hearth. A flicker of something passed across her face. "She's kind." Jonas nodded. "She is." Maren closed her eyes again, not in sleep, but in grief. Grief for something she could not name. "I'm sorry," she whispered, "for being a burden." How are you feeling about the story so far? I'd really love to know what you think. Did it touch your heart or maybe remind you of something from your own life? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. And while you're at it, tell me, where in the world are you listening from? I'd love to see how far this story travels. Maren did not speak much after that first morning. She moved slowly, as though the world beneath her feet still wasn't quite solid. But each day, she did a little more, stood for a few minutes, took careful sips of broth, shuffled across the cabin with Jonas's help to sit by the window and watch the sea. She watched the waves like they might return something they had taken away. Jonas didn't press her. He knew what silence felt like when it was trying to keep someone safe. Instead, he filled the space with routine, repairing nets, boiling herbs for tea, teaching Lena how to patch sails. Life went on in its quiet, sea-worn rhythm. Lena, too, had adjusted. She treated Maren not like a mystery to solve, but a guest to care for, braiding her damp hair after baths, drawing little pictures of her beside the stove, leaving seashells on her pillow-like offerings. Maren always smiled when she found them. Mary, she still flinched at sudden sounds, still woke some nights gasping from dreams she couldn't explain. But little by little, color came back to her cheeks. She laughed once, soft and startled, when Lena made a face behind Jonas's back during supper. The sound had startled all three of them. Jonas found her one evening sitting on the rocks behind the cabin, a blanket around her shoulders, eyes on the horizon. "You shouldn't be out here alone," he said gently, stepping beside her. "I didn't go far," she replied, her voice steadier than he'd heard it before. They stood in silence, the tide lapping against the shore. Then she asked, "Why did you bring me back?" Jonas considered that. "Because the sea gave you to me. And because you were breathing." "That was enough? For me?" "Yeah, that was enough." Maren turned her head. Most people would have asked questions, wanted answers, proof. "I'm not most people," she smiled faintly. "No, you're not." That night, she helped Lena hang herbs by the hearth. She stirred the stew while Jonas mended a line. She even hummed, a soft, unfamiliar tune that drifted through the cabin like smoke. She didn't know where the song came from, but it felt like hers. And for the first time, Jonas noticed Marin was not just surviving, she was beginning to live. The lighthouse had long stood empty, a rusted shell above the bay. Jonas kept its key in an old tin box, mostly out of habit. It hadn't been lit in years. Storms had taken the top glass, and the funding to repair it never came. Still, it made a good storage place for nets, ropes, and broken tools, too stubborn to throw away. Marin asked to go with him one afternoon. Her steps were slow but firm. Her coat was too big, and the wind tugged at her hair, but her eyes held something new: purpose. Inside, the air smelled of salt and thyme. Dust caught in the light, streaming through broken slats. Marin ran her fingers along the old shelf, pausing at a leather-bound book nearly swallowed by a cracked wooden crate. She pulled it free and flipped it open. Paul. It wasn't a journal. Not exactly. Page after page of names, numbers, locations, amounts, crossed-out totals. Some had symbols next to them, X's, check marks. Most were debts. Marin's brow furrowed. She turned to the last few pages. Her hand froze. Isla Varen pending. Next to it, status, presumed deceased. A red line had been drawn through the word pending. She whispered the name aloud. Isla. It didn't feel strange on her tongue. It felt familiar, like a key turning in an unseen lock. She reached deeper into the crate and found a smaller envelope sealed with a stamp, an old crest she somehow recognized. Inside was a folded certificate. Her hands trembled as she opened it. Isla Vierin, sole heir to the Varen Maritime Trust. The words blurred. Her knees gave way and she sat heavily on the floor, the document clutched in both hands. She was Isla, and someone had wanted that name buried. Jonas found her hours later, sitting by the lighthouse window, the paper in her lap. She didn't look at him when he entered. I remember pieces, she said softly. A man, a glass of wine, the sea, then darkness. He said nothing, only walked closer. I wasn't meant to wake up, she whispered, but I did. Jonas sat beside her. And now? She looked at him, gray eyes full of storm and sun. Now I need to decide if I go back to being Isla Varen. She held the document out to him. Or stay Marin. The girl the sea returned. The man came just after the morning fog lifted. Jonas had just returned from pulling in nets when he saw the figure standing at the end of the dock. Tall, tailored, a silhouette too sharp for a place like West Hollow Bay. His coat was pressed, his shoes clean, his gaze calculating. Mr. Hale? The man asked as Jonas approached, voice smooth as polished stone. I believe you have someone who belongs to me. Jonas said nothing, just narrowed his eyes. The man extended a gloved hand. Damon Varen, brother to Isla. We've been looking everywhere. Behind him, the black car waited on the road like a shadow that hadn't moved in hours. I don't know that name, Jonas said flatly. Damon smiled. It didn't reach his eyes. You've been calling her Marin, I believe. A charming name. But not hers. Jonas crossed his arms. And what business would bring a man like you to a fishing village like this? She's family, Damon said. There was confusion, an illness. She disappeared. We feared the worst. Jonas didn't blink. And yet you never filed a report. We wanted to protect her privacy. And now? She's come into significant inheritance. The estate needs her signature. I've come to bring her home. Behind them, footsteps on the dock. Marin. No, Isla. She stood at the edge of the dock, her hands balled at her sides, the wind tugging her hair around her face. Her eyes locked on Damon. You tried to kill me, she said. The words cut through the morning like a blade. Damon didn't flinch. He simply sighed, as if disappointed in a child. Isla, you were sick. You don't remember things clearly. You've been through trauma. I'm here to help you heal. No, she said. You're here because I lived. Jonas stepped forward. You need to leave. Damon's voice turned colder. She belongs with her family. Jonas's stance didn't change. If that were true, she wouldn't have washed up in a net. Damon stared at him a long moment, then tipped his hat. "This isn't over." He turned and walked away, his coat flapping like a threat. Marin, Isla, stood frozen. Jonas stepped to her side. "Now you remember," he said. She nodded, eyes fixed on the horizon. "Yes," she whispered, "and I know why I was left to drown." That night, the cabin was quiet, but the silence had changed. It no longer protected Isla, it waited. Jonas sat at the small kitchen table, turning the inheritance papers over in his hands. Isla stood nearby, wrapped in her blanket, her face pale but steady. Lena had long since gone to sleep upstairs, curled beneath quilts and salt-worn dreams. "He wasn't just my brother," Isla said softly. "He was trustee of the Varon estate. If I died unmarried, everything passed to him, no questions asked." Jonas looked up. "And if you vanished at sea?" She nodded. "Still his. He even arranged a private death certificate. Probably bribed some doctor. Said I'd been depressed, sick, not in my right mind." "You remember all that now?" "Pieces. Like glass beneath water." She shivered. "He told me I needed rest, that I was too tired. He brought me wine." Jonas's hands clenched. "I woke up in a net." They didn't speak for a long while. The fire popped in the hearth. A storm built quietly on the horizon. "He should go," Jonas said at last. Isla blinked. "Go where?" "There's an old outpost cabin up near Grief Point. I used it during the cod shortages. Nobody knows it's there. We'll take Lena. Leave before sunrise." She hesitated. "And the boat? The house? Everything here?" Jonas stood. "It's wood, your flesh and blood. Only one of those matters to me." Before dawn, they packed. Jonas left behind a pot of still warm stew and a note scratched onto the back of a tide chart. Maybe she's not gone, but someone will be. By the time Damon returned with officers who just had a few questions, the cabin stood empty. The coals were cold, the nets had been taken in, and 3 sets of footprints disappeared into the cliffs beyond. The outpost cabin at Grief Point wasn't much, just 4 walls, a rusted stove, and a roof that creaked in the wind, but it was hidden. Built decades ago by Jonas's grandfather, it sat tucked among twisted pines and jagged stone, where sea fog clung like breath and the gulls didn't bother to call. They arrived before first light, cold and tired but unbroken. Jonas stoked the fire while Lena curled beside a heap of blankets with her sketchbook. Isla, no longer just Marin, sat at the table, pen in hand, staring at a blank page. Jonas set a tin cup of coffee beside her. "Sure you want to do this?" he asked. She nodded. "If anything happens to me again, someone needs to know." With slow, careful strokes, she wrote a letter addressed to Samuel Beckwith, her family's longtime attorney in New York. She enclosed the inheritance documents, her own written statement, and a single photograph Jonas had taken on an old Polaroid, her holding Lena's seashell drawing in front of the fire. "If I disappear again," she wrote, "this proves I was alive and not lost." Jonas took the sealed envelope and tucked it into a waterproof pouch. The next day, he rowed it across the bay to an old friend, a retired postal runner who owed him a favor and asked no questions. Back at the cabin, the days folded inward. They chopped wood, patched leaks, boiled tea from bark and herbs. At night, the wind groaned through the trees like an old ship straining in fog. Fear had followed them, quiet but present. Every knock of a branch, every crunch of snow outside made Isla tense. Jonas began reinforcing the door. He kept his father's revolver within reach and taught Lena, gently but firmly, how to use a slingshot. She practiced every day, aiming at tin cans on driftwood stumps. "You're teaching her to fight," Isla said one night. Jonas looked up from the fire. "I'm teaching her not to be afraid of being afraid." Isla watched him in the flickering light, something unreadable in her eyes. Later that evening, she sat alone on the porch with a threadbare blanket wrapped tight around her shoulders. Jonas joined her. silence between them like a dock between boats. "I used to think dying was my greatest fear," she said quietly. "Now I think it's being forgotten." Jonas didn't speak for a while. Then he said, "You're not forgotten. Not here." She turned toward him, the stars sharp in her eyes. "No," she said, "not anymore." The letter reached New York 6 days later. Samuel Beckwith opened it on a rainy afternoon in his law office, a place lined with leather-bound silence and glass reflections. He read Isla's words twice. Then he read them again. His hands trembled slightly as he lifted the notarized documents, the photograph, the familiar handwriting. He picked up the phone and dialed. By nightfall, the Varon Trust was locked under review. The false death certificate was flagged. Damon Varon's travel records and financial transactions were requested by the court. A storm, one built not of weather but of truth, had begun to rise. Back at Grief Point, Isla didn't know any of this yet, but she felt something change. She stood by the edge of the sea, the wind cold against her cheeks, a battered coat wrapped tight around her. In her hand was the old bank card Jonas had found folded inside her inheritance papers. Ella, Verrin, embossed in gold. She didn't cry, not this time. Jonas walked up behind her, quiet as always. "You found something?" he asked. Isla nodded. "My name." She turned toward him, her eyes clear. "I'm Isla Varon. I was left to die for what I was worth. But I lived because someone didn't ask what I was worth, just whether I was breathing." Jonas nodded once. Sounds like a name worth carrying. That night, Isla didn't sleep. Instead, she wrote, page after page in the old ledger book from the lighthouse. Not debts, not numbers, names. Of people like Jonas, like Lena, like the ones who slipped between the cracks and lived in the quiet. She wrote down what they needed: boots, nets, warm quilts. She called it the Drift Fund, not a charity, a promise, a seed planted in the soil of second chances. The frost had begun to melt when the news reached them. Samuel Beckwith's courier arrived in the early morning, his boots heavy with salt and travel. He handed Jonas a sealed envelope, nodded once, and left without waiting for a word. Inside, a court statement confirming Isla Varon's legal status as a live and rightful heir. A warrant for Damon's arrest had already been issued, bank accounts unfrozen, properties transferred back. Her name, once erased, was now protected by law. Jonas read the letter, then passed it to Isla without a word. She stood still as the sea breeze moved through her hair. For a long time she said nothing. Then, slowly, she folded the letter and set it on the windowsill. She didn't reach for a coat, she didn't ask for a suitcase. She walked out onto the porch and stood looking toward the shoreline. Jonas followed. "You could leave now," he said. "You could go anywhere, be anyone again." She turned to him, calm and sure. "I already am someone. You're Isla Varon. I'm also Marin. I'm the girl who bakes bread and watches Lena tie knots too tightly. I'm the woman who smiles when your coffee boils over and you pretend it didn't." She stepped closer. "I'm not staying because I'm grateful. I'm staying because this is the first place I've ever felt whole, even with the cracks." Jonas said nothing, but his shoulders relaxed. From inside the cabin, Lena's voice rang out. "Uncle, she's fixing the door." They turned to see Isla hammering a loose hinge into place with the back of a spoon, her hair tied in a knot, her mouth full of nails. "Pear," Jonas chuckled. "You're staying for the broken door?" She smiled. "I'm staying because no one here needs me to be anything but alive." That evening, they painted a wooden sign to hang above the cabin door. The letters were uneven. The paint ran in places, but the message was clear. No longer lost. No longer alone. Spring came soft and slow to Grief Point. The tide no longer roared, it whispered. The gulls circled lazy arcs over the bay. And the girl who once came from the sea now rose each morning with flower on her hands and purpose in her steps. Isla no longer used the name Marin, but neither did she hide from it. She carried both the way she carried firewood, close, steady, without apology. Some days, she worked the nets with Jonas, sleeves rolled, arms strong. Other days, she stayed behind with Lena, teaching her to bake, to sew, to write her name in curling loops of confidence. Ajan. The cabin was still crooked. The roof still leaked when the rain was stubborn, but something lived inside those walls now, something warmer than fire. Family. The Drift Fund took form quietly. No headlines. No press releases. Just letters. Envelopes tucked into mailboxes in coastal towns, in fishing villages with broken docks and broken luck. Each one contained enough: a voucher for rope, new boots, dried seed, sometimes just cash in worn bills, and a note written in Isla's neat hand. From someone who knows what it's like to be buried and still breathe. Jonas kept the list. He marked needs, made deliveries by boat under cover of dawn. He never said who sent them. Never needed to. Lena kept the thank you notes, little crayon drawings, handprints, smudged pencil scrawls. She pressed them into a shoebox she called the Hope Box. One evening, as the sun dipped low behind the cliffs, Isla sat on the porch stitching letters into a square of linen. Her fingers were swift and certain now, unafraid. Jonas watched her from the doorway, his arms crossed loosely. "What are you making?" he asked. She smiled, nodding toward the cloth. A truth. When she finished, she nailed it to the post by the path. The stitched words fluttered in the wind like a flag. They buried me with silence. But I bloomed with choice. That night, as the stars settled above the bay, a traveler passed by. Just another sailor with salt on his boots and wind in his coat. He paused by the sign, looked toward the glow in the window. "Who wrote that?" he asked Jonas, who stood stacking wood nearby. Jonas dusted off his gloves and answered softly. Someone they said was dead, but she decided to live. The fields behind the cabin had never grown anything but wild grass and salt-crusted weeds, until now. One morning, Isla stepped barefoot into the soft soil, with a pouch of seeds in her apron pocket and Lena by her side. Jonas waited nearby with the hoe, watching as they knelt together, pressing hope into dirt one fingertip at a time. No ceremony, no speeches. Just breath, just life. They worked until the sun was high, their hands stained with earth. They planted herbs, beans, cabbage, and a row of sunflowers along the fence, just because Lena liked the way they looked like they were smiling. That evening, Isla sat on the porch steps, a cup of tea between her palms and dirt still under her nails. Jonas came out beside her and sat without a word. "Ma, Cor." She looked at him. "Do you think it's strange?" she asked. He raised an eyebrow. "What is?" "That this place was almost my grave. And now it's mine. Ours." Jonas didn't smile, not quite. "So was mine. Different way. Same weight." They sat in the hush that followed. The wind moved gently through the pines. Inside, Lena hummed a tune from the radio, drawing pictures of chickens with hats. "I don't think I was ever supposed to end up in a place like this," Isla said quietly. Jonas shrugged. "Maybe not. But I chose it." He nodded. "And that makes it yours." A full year passed since she was pulled from the sea. Isla Verin never returned to the boardrooms or mansions that once bore her name. She sent final instructions to the family trust, designating her shares to fund the Drift Fund permanently, but declining to attend a single meeting. She wasn't hiding. She was simply living. And so each day she woke to sunlight, to flower-dusted shelves, to warm fish stew, to Lena's endless stories and Jonas's quiet presence. She had not been saved by wealth or power. Etzengemi Dex. She had been saved by dirt, by choice, by kindness. Hetzix Texi. Chazai, Texi, 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 Kexi. And now, as spring crept into the corners of the land and the seeds began to sprout in crooked little rows, she knelt again with her fingers in the soil. Not to survive, but to grow. If this story moved you, reminded you that healing is real, or renewed your belief in second chances, we invite you to subscribe to Healing Stories. Here, we share real-life journeys of strength, love, and hope. Stories that speak straight to the soul. Thank you for being here. And always remember, no matter how far you fall, there's always a way back to the light. Where are you watching from? Drop a comment below and let us know.